Welcome to WHX Insights. My name is Peter Birch. This episode is powered by WHX Tech, and I'm joined by Marissa Fayer, CEO of DeepLook Medical. Marissa, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. I'd love to get your take firstly on DeepLook Medical, who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So I'm the CEO of DeepLook Medical. At DeepLook, what we do is we're an imaging technology that can visualize soft tumor lesions in any modality and in any soft tumor area. So 38 of them around the body. So we can be in mammography, MRI, CT, ultrasound. What's special about us is we layer on top of existing tech, so hardware and software. And additionally, we're the only technology that can see inside dense tissue. Very important for dense breasts, lung, liver, thyroid, those types of areas where it's oftentimes very hard to see a lesion, and people are often pulled back into additional imaging just because they can't see. Their radiologists can't see. So we're software. We're in this like gray area of software / AI. So that's a fun area that I'm sure we're going to talk about. But that's what we do. We layer on. We're just another vision layer on top of existing imaging. And we're FDA cleared. We're in the UK and Canada as well, moving into the GCC. So it's exciting to be here.
I guess the framing for this conversation today is around that patient empowerment side, because I know that's an area that's of a particular passion for you. Tell me a little bit about where that comes from. And I guess in this era of digital health and innovation, and especially not just in this region, but globally too, walk me through how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, everything that we should be doing in the healthcare sector should be directed back to the patients. Now, sometimes we're talking about they need to be more efficient so that they can have more time with the patients. I mean, healthcare is about patients. And that's why we need efficiency. That's why we need better vision. That's why we need, all of these technologies. And so when we're talking about healthcare, it's bringing it back, to the patient. And I think that's incredibly important. I also think for me and a lot of the work that I do specifically, it's global. And it's in high income countries, but it's also in lower middle income countries. And so, it's different around the world. What we do necessarily in the US and in Europe, and here, in UAE, we're not necessarily going to do in lower middle income countries that might be in Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America. And so we have to talk about what patient-centric care actually looks like to the patient, where they're living, who they are. Is it at home? Is it in a village? Is it in a more rural community? Is it at clinics as opposed to larger hospitals? Is it handhelds versus, very large MRI machines? And I think we need technology, again, not just AI. We need technology that can scale to all these regions. And so again, back to the patient. Where are they? Where do they need their healthcare delivered to them?
Yeah. What do you mean, not just AI? Haven't you heard it'll revolutionize the future of healthcare? But as you touched on before, potentially there's an opportunity for healthcare technology to assist with patients feeling or being more engaged in healthcare because it's alleviating pressure on the clinicians. But is there more to the potential of these technologies to improve the patient empowerment and engagement side of things?
AI is a massive tool for patient empowerment and information, long as they're still speaking to a clinician, a nurse, a midwife, a physician, and let's be clear, I personally use it. I don't diagnose myself. I mean, sometimes I do, and I probably think I'm dying every day, but I mean, that's not how it's used. It's used as, hey, this is what's happening. I had a gallbladder attack. What should I be doing next to calm my system down, so that when I go and speak to my doctor, I have a list of questions to ask them, so that I'm not just walking in blind and saying, oh God, I wish I asked that. It's giving you the information that you can then take informed and have those conversations that are then more meaningful. So that also, now we have the portals and everybody gets to talk to their doctor. And occasionally I'll just message because I've had the conversation to be like, hey, still feeling this. Is there something else that I should do? And so I think that, we can use AI and ChatGPT and, all of the other GPTs out there to get information, but it's only as good as the information and the prompts that you give it. And not everybody is great at the correct prompts. And so, I mean, there's been a lot of talk today, especially about the mental health implications. And, hey, I lost my job. What's the tallest, nearest bridge? The answer, that was generated was, so sorry you lost your job. The nearest bridge with the highest height is the Brooklyn Bridge. No, 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 that's not the answer to be giving. And so there needs to be limitations on it as well. But that was the prompt that was entered, and that's how it was trained. And so when we talk about having information, AI is incredibly important. And we talk about AI, it's not just generative, ChatGPT versus, it's AI is anything. I mean, I wear an Aura ring. That is information literally on my finger, but I personally do something with it. I look at it, I analyze it, I change the way that, I eat, I sleep, I've done certain things. If you're just collecting data to collect data and you're not changing, then that's a different story. And I go, personally, I go back to my doctor and say, actually, I've been noticing this, trend in the last 3 months because I started doing this. And then it's a conversation starter. I think it's a great way to, all of this information, it's a great way to bring it back to the patient, and bring it back to the conversations that we can have with our physicians to make it more personable, to more efficient.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because whilst, access to large language models and all of that might have only been, really publicly available the last couple of years, the concept of the general public or any human looking to seek answers wherever they can get it most reliably has never really changed. It's just interesting that the power of these tools, be it social media or prior then even, speaking to friends and family, it's similar but it's not scalable. But when you've got, a tool that then gives you access to all of that information and seems quite directive and almost relatable, that's a whole other challenge. And, it's whilst we can create tools and systems that are available for patients if they were to access it, I don't think we're ever going to change the fact that people will seek answers wherever it's most easily accessible. So
yeah, it's true. And I think it's also, it's very biased because you'll keep asking the questions until you get the answer you want. Just like you will go to the family member or the friend group that will give you the answer that you probably want. Not the one that necessarily is correct, or the most informed. And that's the other point. So, while there's a ton and a dearth of information that's out there and that's been programmed in, what hasn't been programmed in? The empathy side hasn't. The most appropriate for the individual. Unless you put every single blood marker and genome of yours inside, there, quite honestly, it doesn't know everything about you. And that's like going to your auntie who's going to give you the most reassuring information where it might not be the right one. And I think it's like, we're still seeking truth. And nobody has that yet. And not to say a physician has that yet, but quite honestly, they've been trained. And I think where we get to is where it brings people closer to have more efficient conversations, where, it's a back and forth instead of a, yes, doctor, I'll try that.
I think the expectations almost have changed over the years too of the general public of, what that clinician engagement might look like due to some of those tools and the culture and all of that. I want to go back to something you raised earlier, a really important point of when we talk about patient empowerment and access across the globe, the needs in some regions and communities are going to be vastly different to others in other regions. And, we could be privileged to be able to access tools and services and tests that some may deem as, almost a luxury to be able to obtain, which then creates a whole other issue, which we could talk about. But then enabling access to areas where it's required most, where it's least accessible, that seems like a much more arduous task. Like, talk to me about providing better access into areas that need it the most.
Well, I think we have to think about, again, what is needed at that location. So, for instance, I do a lot of work in the mammography section, and I developed a 3D mammography system. I very much believe in it. It's, it is standard of care around the world, but most especially it's a workhorse. So in the US, when we're talking, and Europe and very developed countries where it's about volume, in the US, we do 42 million mammograms a year. In reality, it should be closer to about 75 to 100. And that's volume. Like, I live in New York City. It is a volume center. It is literally like I'm getting my mammography. It's like a factory, like one in, one out, one in, one out. And it's a workhorse, and it's very good at that. The problem is it can't see inside dense breasts, and over 50% of the population has dense breasts, disproportionately Black women and Asian women. Who doesn't have mammographies? Africa and most of Asia. And the problem is actually ultrasound would be a great technology to do breast imaging. Also, more power stable, less power required, less shielding, less a large center needed. You can also literally take it in the palm of your hands. Or maternal care. Not everybody can get to a hospital or a clinic, but they can get to their regional and local clinic. And what about going to, a smaller clinic? What about going to the woman, and she's pregnant and you need to do a maternal scan? Well, that's great. If she's having complications, you need to know earlier so you can get her to the hospital. Because when we're talking about sometimes a more rural region, that's a long journey. And you would rather have that preemptively than when she's bleeding out because she's having complications as a result of birth. And so, we need to talk about the technologies that are most applicable at the location, and also cultural sensitivity. So again, I do a lot of work in women's health, so I'll bring up all the women's health examples, but cervical cancer screenings, and especially like taking self-collection. Self-collection just barely exists in the US. Actually, the first FDA at-home cervical cancer self-collection, it was just approved just a few months ago in the US. It's been going on around the world for years. And so women can do it themselves. They can do it at the clinic site, but do it themselves so that they don't have a stranger taking a cervical cancer swab that's typically a man. That is not culturally sensitive in the US and Europe. We've become very desensitized to a lot of that. So making sure the care is appropriate around the world is incredibly important. And that's, again, I'm always controversial about this. I know we're at a tech conference, but not all tech is AI. And that's super low tech, but it's still tech because you have to process the samples. They have to be processed differently in different types of solution versus what, you do in the US. You immediately put it into a solution and you send it to a lab. It's a different technology. And again, we're here at, a tech conference, which is not just an AI conference. And so we need to kind of think about the scale of what that looks like.
I guess on that too, enabling some technologies in regions where like mass scale is required, or like the not a lo-fi approach, but the you were talking about size and capacity and scale in order to be able to do things where you may not see it within, say, a private hospital within the US or UK or Australia, but being able to do a handheld scan. Do you find there's somewhere on this continuum where, whilst it would be best in class to be able to do this, it's not practically feasible, so this solution is better than nothing? Or at what point, given the rate in which technology is advancing, when 5-10 years ago in any area of, be it imaging or diagnostics or whatever, what used to be required was a big whopping machine in a particular location that was often an island of information anyway and not connected to anything else. These days, depending on where we're talking about, it could be done with a smartphone connected with an app or a handheld device. And what maybe a couple of years ago could have been, well, this is good indicative information, but it's not clinically validated. I feel like there's more and more technologies that are almost feeling a little bit consumer grade, but has been FDA or TGA or whatever regulation approved. Where are you seeing it in given your work, the level in which we're at in terms of some of these technologies.
Yeah, and I never want to say that anything that's going on in a developing country is less than. Actually, most of the time, it's better than. We have these big legacy systems in, the US and the UK, Australia, Europe, all these different places where innovation actually it gets stuck because you have to work within the big systems. When you don't have those systems or you're just creating those systems, innovation can happen instantly. And quite honestly, I mean, I've gotten cervical cancer screenings in East Africa and they're better than in the US. And things like that. You can have, now that the technology has completely changed, so it has become commercialized and consumerized because yes, we now have these smartphones, but if you add this extra special created specifically for the phone, you actually now have a better visualization into the cervix, or you can do handheld ultrasounds reading it on your phone or on a tablet. It has been created consumers, and the consumers are the nurses, the midwives, the doctors in different locations. Quite honestly, I would actually probably rather use that tech than some of the almost sometimes antiquated, very large, big rooms, like you were saying, technology, because they're on their own island. They're not connected. All of these other pieces of information, they're cloud-based, they're connected. It's teleradiology as well. You can be taking something anywhere you are, send it to a teleradiologist, and they could be reading it, they could be in their bathrobe, and they could be at home, but they're still a radiologist, and they're still able to read it, and they don't have to be in the same country. I mean, and so we think about, yes, a lot of this has become, it's as a result of these newer technologies becoming consumerized, things becoming more handheld and not plugged into a wall and plugged into a system and plugged into a big room. That's, things have gotten smaller, chips have gotten smaller, technology has gotten smaller, and everything that is handheld, it's becoming easier. It's also portability. So when you talk about the rest of the world, it's portability. You can put it in your, as a woman, you can put it in your purse, you can put it in a little suitcase, you can move it around. And some of that technology is actually far superior or equivalent to some of these bigger systems. And it's delivering care where the patients actually are, as opposed to making them come to where the hospital is. And this is a little bit also of a change of the pandemic. And it's one of the few blessings that came out of, of the pandemic, is that you're wanting to keep people actually away from these bigger hospitals. And so you're wanting to see them in some of these more, smaller centers. And then you're elevating, when you're working on, it's called triage. You're elevating them to the higher hospital, but not everybody needs to, they cut their knee. Okay, well, you don't need to go to the emergency room for that.
This makes sense to you and me and anyone that kind of understands the technology, deep in the weeds of healthcare technology and the advancement in the capability around, be it, portable devices or, phones and attachments. And that's great. And there's something weird about humans, though, in my opinion, that where, there's, in order to build trust and credibility, there's it sounds like I'm being a bit naff about it, but the theatrics sometimes of healthcare, or the perceived value of an engagement that you have with a clinician, and that comes from years and years of cultural or whatever it might come from. Comparatively, the image that you could, take with an attachment on a phone of a dermoscopic lesion or whatever could be just as better, if not just as good, if not better, than say taking it with a big hairdryer attached to a wardrobe. But if on the same side, if you were a patient that was unfamiliar with any of that technology and your doctor whips out a smartphone to take an image of you, kind of be like, well, is this an equivalent level of care? What we know is it's important to have that trust and credibility to build that with clinicians. How do you see us overcoming that kind of perception that exists of invisible nature of some of the really good technology that exists? Or how do we build that trust in healthcare?
I think it's still around regulation. So you still need to have, FDA, CE, UK, you still have to have regulatory clearances. And I think that's incredibly important. And that is a governing, the governing bodies related to healthcare and med device. And so I think having that still regulated is very important. I also think it's, there's very few places that don't know what a smartphone is anymore. And I think there's more smartphones in, one tiny village in Kenya than there are MRI machines on the entire continent. So let me just be very clear. Like, that's a big problem. And so I think most people would be like, oh, okay, it's a smartphone. I mean, it's becoming far more popular that most people actually know what that is. And they would probably trust it better than this big old clunky machine that they don't know what it does. And it's very scary. And so I think that is the difference. And that's where we go back to, it's patient centric, it's consumer driven, it's more accessible. Not just locationally, but it's more accessible to understand. The other point is, how exciting is it that you can have this image maybe, in the palm of your hand, and you can talk about it with the doctor, as opposed to the doctor calling you and be like, yeah, you're fine, bye. No. What do you mean? Can you show me? Can we talk about it? Or, oh, you have cancer, so you have to go for treatment. Okay, but can we talk about what that looks like? Has it shrunk? Have I, reacted well to a treatment? Have I not? What can we do about it? And so I think there's areas where, all of this still needs to be regulated. AI governing bodies as well. There's technology governing bodies. There's healthcare governing bodies. That's what, all of these, countries have. And it's incredibly important that any of these technologies go through those governing bodies. And while it is bureaucratic in nature, it's becoming a little, everyone's trying to make it a little less bureaucratic, because there is a volume now. Innovation, it's more accessible, it's easier. You don't have to only be at a big company. And that's the other side. You're at smaller companies that, there's a lot of investors here as well. And, there's a lot of small companies that are trying to get money, obviously are us included, and so many here. And what's happening is, you're making these technologies in smaller companies, and then they eventually get rolled up into larger companies. But the access to innovation, the amount of innovation, and the amount of innovation around the world is at a staggering pace. And most of the time it's being created for personal reasons, for personal, a lot, it obviously has to be a business case around it, but it's because my mother, my brother, my sister, my wife, myself went through something. There was not a solution that I liked. And so we created something. We obviously saw that it was a business around that, because you can't have any innovation without business. But there's a lot more happening in the ecosystem. And so it is naturally more patient and customer focused.
I'll come back to that in a sec, because the utility or the usefulness of having that information as a patient on your phone and being able to, I feel like some of this technology is almost going to change the nature of consultations and all of that, which initially, when people talk about good technology, it shouldn't get in the way of the workflow, but if it enables a better engagement with a patient and clinician. So I think if the ecosystem approaches with a bit more of an open mind towards that, then everyone will benefit. And to your point as well, what's interesting, I always find about healthcare, is that everyone has some kind of personal connection to a healthcare engagement. Whilst we are innovating in this space, we're all either consumers or carers, or patients and carers. So that when it comes to this conversation around, we need to ensure that patients are in the center of care and that there's better patient engagement and empowerment, I don't think anyone is going to disagree with those statements. But if we were so good at it as an ecosystem, we probably wouldn't be talking about it. So it feels like sometimes this point around let's ensure the patient's in the center of it is kind of a thing that we need to say. How do we really embody that desire to build solutions that are patient-centric or empowering patients in what they achieve, and how do you go about that?
Well, the reason a lot of these solutions are being created is because most healthcare has only been created for white men. That's only a small segment of the population, of the global population, to be clear. So women, not at all included in, more or less any innovation. Anybody from any other color besides white, barely any innovation. Listen, epigenetics and everybody's different from all different regions. We do not react the same to drugs. We do not react the same to treatments. We do not react the same to anything. We do not present the same as well. A woman having a heart attack is not a typically chest clutching pain. It is actually stomach and back pain. And slowly it builds. And that's not studied. That's not discussed. And what about different life cycles? So women, go through obviously significant hormone changes throughout the life cycle of her entire body, where men only do it once. It's only in puberty. That's it. So women have puberty and childbirth, which might be multiple times, and there's, hormone fluctuations every single time, and they're not the same for each birth. Let's just be clear. Then it's perimenopause and menopause, and then, postmenopause. Like, there's a whole lot that's going on. Women were not included in clinical trials until 1993 in the US. And honestly, pregnant women are barely included. And finally, we're starting to include people, again, who are just not white men or just white people in general. Because quite honestly, somebody who is in South America or in Africa is completely different body, genetics than a white Norwegian man. And so you have to think about what that does. And so when we're talking about, okay, great, like, why is all this innovation out there? Because nobody's looked at them. Nobody has looked at all of these other subsegments of people, and there needs to be innovation for all of them. And it's not the same. It's not the same innovation. It's not the same drugs. It's not the same anything. And so that's why so many people are coming up with all of these different ideas. And also now that, different geographies as well, healthcare systems operate differently. They're completely different in the US versus they are in Europe versus they are here. And I just had a conversation just before where it was actually, this gentleman said, actually, it's just so much easier to have innovation here in UAE. And the reason is there's no legacy healthcare systems you have to work within. In the US, you have to work within a legacy health system to try to push this innovation into systems that have now consolidated. So now there's fewer systems and they're just more bureaucratic. And here, or, in Southeast Asia or in, Latin America or anywhere in Africa, they're newer systems. They want the innovation now because they're creating the systems. A lot of people not even using paper anymore. I actually heard when I was here last that there are no paper patient records here in the entire country. I'm pretty sure my doctor is still writing notes, like physically writing notes. And while that's great and it's in, a trackable system and they scan it in, it's still a piece of paper. And I've been to Africa many, many times, and there are entire rooms just filled with patient records. How are you going to digitize that? Because everybody moves. Now that we're a much more global society, people are moving. You're not just staying in your village, seeing your one doctor. Everyone's moving. And even when we talk about it, in the US, like, if I want to go to a different doctor that's out of my system, I actually have to pay to go get my own records and stand there. That's not an acceptable system. And so I think, like, just having different people, different systems causes innovation. It's the necessity of creating something that works different and better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's complicated and nuanced, and to do that at scale, it's something I feel like there's no one particular organization or system that has the ability to do that. So I feel like,
and there won't ever be, because there is not one solution. That's the problem.
I was going to say, so I feel like partnerships and collaborations then will be super important in doing that kind of thing. How do you think about those types of engagements to really address this at scale?
We all have to do everything in partnership, because not anybody, there is no one governing system. There is not one best way to do something. And even, within a region, within a country, which in, a city, there's not one best way to do something. And so the partnership has to be there. It's the small innovative companies, the larger companies that have the market share to grow and scale. It's the health systems that are antiquated with the newer health systems that might want to grow and change. It's also global, coordination and partnership. You also have to be very sensitive to regional dynamics too. And so partnership is literally the only way that anything gets done. we also, most of us, sadly, work in our own little silos and think that we're the best one and the only one. No, because we can't do anything without without imaging happening. We cannot. Like, we need an image to utilize our technology. So we need to work in partnership with those imaging companies, the other software companies. We need to work with them. Otherwise, we don't have a product. And so this is how, we can all survive, but we all have to work together because, again, kind of what we're talking about, we go back to the patient. If we do not work together in partnership in every respect of that manner, there's nothing that's getting better for the patient. We're still where we are and nothing's improving. And so when we talk about tech and AI and all of these things, they're ways for us to innovate and to partner better together to get to better outcomes for the patient. Yeah. And partnership is the only way we're going to do it. It is. And we also have to think about it from a patient. We're all patients. We're all patients at one time or another. What would we want? What technologies would we want? How would we want our systems to be working, our doctors to be talking, the information to be coming together? And we sometimes lose sight of that. It doesn't matter if you're, if you're being imaged on a GE or a Philips or a Siemens. I don't care. I just want my image taken and I want it with the best quality. And I want the best technology to be used to help my doctor get to a faster, better, more efficient, accurate diagnosis. I don't care, and in reality, nobody does.
No, 100%. And I guess in the spirit of that continuous improvement and seeing those step changes in healthcare, you mentioned, some of the silver lining around the pandemic and the adoption at scale and whatnot. Whilst we don't want another pandemic, but also at the same time, there's sometimes in healthcare it feels like incremental change. It moves so slowly that on a day-to-day basis you don't feel like there's progress unless you look back over year on year. Where would you like to see it? Like, is it possible to have any step changes or moments of inflection in healthcare where we start to really move the needle and improve outcomes for patients, or at least provide that feeling of better engagement for them? What needs to happen?
I don't think there's a single moment. I think it's incremental, because quite honestly, you can't just change a whole healthcare system, on a specific date and make those changes and expect it to work. You have to make small incremental changes so that when we look back in 5 or 10 years, the change has happened. And I think that's actually better because you can't just change everything and, oh, okay, it's all better. No, it's never going to be that easy. And we've known that throughout the history, of humankind and healthcare and medicine. So I think it's actually easier to make smaller incremental changes and look back on it. I mean, I think when we think about 2030, which sadly is not that far away where we thought it was many years ago, I think there's going to be small incremental changes. I think the bigger changes are, 2040, 2050, when we look back and say, oh, okay, now we're using, generative AI to do X, Y, and Z, and we would never have thought about that. Now, just a few years ago, we never thought about doing home test collection for diagnosis of diseases. And now, all of a sudden, in 5 years, it is completely common. I mean, I was proud to be on the COVID-19 task force in the US, working with the NIH, and it was a lot of work to get that out there. And you know what? Now you have it for flu, and you have it for strep, and you have it for, potentially types of other diseases. And it's common. We don't even think about it anymore. Like, that was the step change. Things like that. And again, never hope to have another pandemic in our entire lifetime, but that itself was a step change. I don't think, and I would hope that we're not going to have another one to create that type of change. I think AI is incremental. I think technology is incremental. I think small changes need to happen within healthcare systems to open the door to larger changes. Because I have to tell you, we are not ready in I don't think any system in any country for really AI and technology making decisions about any of our healthcare without a physician present. It is an augment, it is an aid, it is a verification. And I think that's where we are right now. I think maybe by 2030, there might be a lot more decision support and potentially screening out of certain additional tests as a result of AI. And that becomes the step change to something bigger. But it has to be incremental because you have to have trust. This is healthcare. This is not like, a toy we're playing it with and we don't care if a screw comes loose and it breaks. This is our body, ourselves. And so I just don't think those changes could happen so dramatically unless, I don't know, another ice age happens or something.
Yeah. No, it's high stakes. I'm totally with you. And I'm a big believer in those 1%ers having compounding to be able to have that real impact. Marissa, I really appreciate you making the time for this conversation. I feel like it's added a lot of value. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us on WHX Insights. My name is Peter Birch. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube so you can catch all the future episodes. Thank you so much.